Welcome to Lyra Echo Stories, where every story echoes emotions, memories, and hidden truths. Step in and feel the echo of every tale.
My father announced I was the family disgrace between the sweet potatoes and the cranberry sauce. Timing, as always, was not his strong suit. There were 11 people at the table. I counted them the way I count everything automatically, before I need to. My father at the head, my mother to his left, Melissa and her husband Derek arranged like a display case across from me. Then various aunts, uncles, and one cousin who I was fairly certain hadn't spoken a complete sentence in my presence since 2009. The table was my mother's pride-ironed linen. The good china, a centerpiece of dried orange slices and pine cones she'd seen on Pinterest and spent 3 weeks recreating. She told me about it on the phone in September. I'd listened. I always listen. 3 homes, my father said. He was looking at Melissa when he said it, but the words were aimed at me the way certain people throw things, appearing to look elsewhere when they release. Your sister has 3 homes, and her youngest starts kindergarten in the fall. That's what building a life looks like. He picked up his wine glass, set it back down without drinking from it. And then there's you. Melissa did the thing she always does when Dad compares us. A small, careful expression, not quite a wince, not quite a smile designed to communicate that she's embarrassed for me while remaining personally untouched. She's been perfecting it since we were teenagers. I'll give her this. It's technically flawless. Dad, she said. The word doing a lot of diplomatic work. I'm just saying what's true. He spread his hands, the gesture of a man who considers frankness a virtue he performs for others' benefit. Still renting. 38 years old. Claire, your sister's youngest has a 529 account and a bedroom set from Restoration Hardware. What do you have? 11 people looked at me. I've sat at this table my entire life. I know its specific creak when my father leans back, the way the overhead light catches the crystal water glasses and throws small rainbows across the linen, the sound my mother makes when she wants to speak, and decides against it a soft intake of breath, held, then released through her nose. She made that sound now. I heard it clearly. You're the family disgrace, he said it almost gently. That's not an attack. That's a father who wants better for his daughter. Derek, Melissa's husband, who had spent the better part of cocktail hour explaining to me what equity was, Derek nodded slowly, as though witnessing something profound. What I felt in that moment was not what movies would have you believe. There was no rushing heat, no blurring at the edges of my vision. What I felt was something closer to the sensation of a calculation, completing a final figure, populating at the bottom of a long column of numbers. Confirmation, the particular stillness that comes not from calm, but from certainty. I looked at my phone on the table beside my plate, the screen dark. In my email, unread since I'd glanced at it an hour ago, was a subject line I already knew by heart. Payment received $47,200 Elmwood Apartments, November. Their address. Their building. My building. I picked up my fork and cut into the turkey. More gravy? My mother said to no one in particular, already reaching for the boat. The thing my father doesn't understand about me has never understood, in 38 years of trying and failing to understand me, is that I don't argue in real time. It has nothing to do with cowardice. Arguments in real time are expensive. You spend energy you don't get back. You say things that are approximately right rather than precisely right, and you hand the other person the satisfaction of watching you react. I learned this young. I learned it, in fact, at this table. Melissa was 11 when she painted a series of watercolors that my parents hung in the hallway. Small paintings, flowers and birds, the kind of thing that photographs beautifully and means nothing. That same year, I won second place at the regional science fair for a project on water filtration. I came home with a ribbon and a certificate signed by a judge whose name I still remember. My father was in the living room with company. He glanced at the certificate. "Put it in your room," he said. "We have people over." I put it in my room. I put a lot of things in my room after that. I got very good at rooms nobody entered, work nobody witnessed, progress that left no marks on the walls of this house. It turns out that's an excellent way to build a real estate portfolio. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The conversation moved on the way conversations do. Someone mentioned football. Derek pivoted to a story about his golf handicap, Melissa asked my mother about a recipe, and I sat with the quiet that had settled inside my chest and ate my dinner and did not look at my phone again. There's a specific pleasure in knowing something no one in the room knows. I'm not proud of it exactly, but I won't pretend it doesn't exist. At some point during dessert, my father circled back. He has a habit of this landing a thing, letting it breathe, returning to it to make sure it took root. He asked me, with the patient tone of someone managing disappointment across a long timeline, whether I'd thought any more about talking to Derek about opportunities at his company. Derek looked up from his pie. "We might have something on the administrative side," he said. "Entry level, but it's a foot in the door." I smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." My mother watched me. She's always watching, my mother. She watches the way animals in open fields watch constantly, quietly, without ever fully relaxing. What she does with what she sees, I've never entirely figured out. I reached for my phone. I turned it face down on the table, the screen against the linen, and set it between the water glass and the pie plate where anyone might reach for it. And I excused myself to get more coffee. I want to be precise about this part, because the precision matters. I didn't plan what happened next. I made one decision to set the phone down, and then I got up and walked to the kitchen and stood at the counter, and filled my cup from the carafe my mother had left warming on the burner. I could hear the table from there. Melissa saying something about preschool applications. Derek laughing at something he'd said himself. I had a reason for setting the phone face down, but I want to tell you the whole story first, because the ending only makes sense if you understand the beginning. And the beginning is not this table, this turkey, this particular ribbon of a wound my father has been pulling at for 38 years. The beginning is a building, and what it took to buy it. I graduated from Ohio State in May of 2008 with a degree in finance and $22,000 in student loans, which, at the time, felt like a problem the size of a planet. By June, I had an apartment in Columbus, 1 bedroom, 3rd floor, radiator that knocked all winter like someone was trying to get out. The rent was $740 a month. The property management company that collected that rent was called Hargrove Associates. Within 6 months, I was working for them. Not because it was my dream. I want to be accurate about that. I took the job because it paid $38,000 a year and came with health insurance and an office with a window. And in 2008, you took what came with a window. But I was good at it immediately. In the way you're sometimes good at things you didn't know you were built for, the way certain locks and certain keys fit without explanation. I understood numbers. I understood how buildings aged and what they cost to maintain, and where landlords bled money they didn't have to bleed. I understood, very quickly, that the people who owned buildings were not categorically smarter than the people who worked for them. They had simply gotten there first, or inherited, or both. I started saving in 2009. Not aggressively, I didn't have the income for aggressive, but methodically. A fixed amount each month, transferred automatically the day after my paycheck posted, moved to an account I'd set up specifically so that accessing it required 3 steps instead of 1. Small barrier, outsized effect. I understand now that this is called behavioral economics. In 2009, I just thought of it as not trusting myself. I didn't tell my family. This requires some explanation, or maybe it doesn't. My father has opinions about financial decisions, the way weather has opinions about your plans comprehensively, impersonally, regardless of what you'd prefer. When I was 24, he told me that renting was throwing money away, which is the thing people say when they've never run a cash flow analysis on a property they couldn't actually afford to buy. When I was 26, he suggested I look into marrying someone stable, which he clarified meant someone with property. When I was 27, he forwarded me an article about women who waited too long to prioritize the important things, by which he meant, in order, marriage, homeownership, children. The article was from a website I'd never heard of and cited no sources. I stopped discussing finances with him around the time I stopped discussing the weather. Both conversations followed the same pattern and arrived at the same destination. I bought my first property in 2012. A duplex in Grandview Heights, 2 units, 1 tenant already in place, the other vacant and needing work. I used $31,000 of my own money for the down payment and borrowed the rest. The vacant unit needed a new water heater, subflooring in the bathroom, and paint throughout. I did the painting myself over 3 weekends. The water heater and subfloor I contracted out to a man named Phil, who charged fair rates and showed up when he said he would, which, in my experience, is rarer than any licensing credential. I had a tenant in the second unit by October. The duplex cash flowed $340 a month after expenses. This is not a dramatic number. I want to be clear about that. $340 a month will not change your life, but it changes the rate at which your life changes, which is a different thing. And over time, a more important one. I incorporated Crestview Holdings in 2013, filed the paperwork myself, paid the state fee, opened a business checking account at a credit union on Henderson Road. The name came from nowhere in particular, a combination of sounds that carried no personal significance, which was exactly the point. I wanted something that could sit in public records without announcing itself. People search for their own name. They rarely search for words that mean nothing to them. My parents didn't know the company existed. My sister didn't know. I told no one, which sounds more calculated than it was, at first. In the beginning, I didn't tell anyone, simply because there was nothing to tell. One duplex, modest returns, a plan that might not work. Later, when there was something to tell, the habit of silence was already formed. If I'm honest, and I'm trying to be, there was more to it than habit. When I was 14, I won second place at the regional science fair. My project was on water filtration. Contamination rates in municipal systems, comparison of filtration methods, a small working model I'd built from PVC pipe and aquarium tubing. I worked on it for 11 weeks. The judge, a woman named Dr. Patricia Holt, whose name I read off her badge, told me it was the most technically rigorous project she'd evaluated at the junior level that year. I drove home with my ribbon and my certificate and my small working model. My father was in the living room. He had company over, a couple whose names I no longer remember. People he knew from somewhere, and they were all looking at a painting Melissa had done. A watercolor of a barn that was, objectively, a competent watercolor of a barn. My father had framed it. He'd hung it on the wall beside the window where the light hit it best. I stood in the doorway with my model. He glanced at the certificate. Then, at the model, briefly. "Put it in your room. We have people over." I put it in my room. My mother, I found out 20-some years later, retrieved it from the recycling bin after I'd gone to college. She'd kept it in a shoebox in her closet. I didn't know that then. Then, I only knew that I'd carried a thing home that I thought mattered, and it had been directed out of sight, and the barn was still on the wall. I stopped showing him things after that. Not that day, not in one decision, but gradually. Over the following years, the things I accomplished migrated inward, into rooms he didn't have access to. Grades, awards, later, money, and what I built with it. I told myself it was protection. Maybe it was, partly. By 2021, Crestview Holdings held 7 properties across 3 counties. The duplex in Grandview, 2 4-unit buildings in Clintonville, a small retail strip I'd purchased in a foreclosure sale and spent 14 months turning around, and a 12-unit apartment complex on the east side of Columbus that had required the most complex financing I'd ever assembled and had kept me awake, genuinely awake, for 6 nights running. The 12th unit of that complex had a tenant named Gary, who paid on time every month and kept a small herb garden on his balcony. Then, in the spring of 2022, a property management company out of Cincinnati listed a 24-unit complex in Westerville for sale. Elmwood Apartments, 1847 Maple Drive, solid bones, below market rents, under-maintained but not damaged. The listing sat for 63 days before I made an offer. I didn't know my parents lived there when I made the offer. I found out when I received the rent roll, the document listing every tenant, their unit, and their monthly payment, and saw my father's name on the second line. Unit 104, Robert and Sandra Beaumont. I sat with that information for a long time. Then I signed the purchase agreement. Let me tell you about Derek Walsh. Derek is 36 years old and sells commercial insurance for a regional firm that has a logo involving an oak tree. He drives a Tahoe that is 1 trim level above what makes financial sense for his income, which I know because I've looked at comparable incomes for his title in his industry, because that's the kind of thing I do. He coaches his son's soccer team on Saturday mornings, and he calls it coaching with the full weight of the word, the way people do when they need the word to do more work than the activity deserves. He is not a bad person. I want to be fair. He simply has the specific confidence of a man who has never been wrong about something expensive enough to correct him permanently. He also, as it turned out, had opinions about real estate. The thing people don't understand, he said this was 20 minutes before my father's Thanksgiving address. During the window, when the turkey was resting, and everyone was standing in the kitchen with wine, is that appreciation is the whole game. Cash flow is secondary. You need to be thinking about where the value is going, not where it is. He was saying this to me. Specifically to me. I nodded. Like our third property, we're already up 14% since acquisition. 14. He held up 2 fingers, then added 2 more, apparently to illustrate the number 14. That's equity you can't get in the market. I said. Are you in anything, like investment-wise? A little, I said. You should look at REITs if you want exposure without the management headache. Low barrier to entry. Good for he paused, generous people who are just getting started. I am going to tell you with complete sincerity that this was one of the more technically interesting conversations I have ever participated in from a purely observational standpoint. Derek had, in the span of 90 seconds, inverted the actual risk profile of appreciation versus cash flow investing, cited an unrealized gain as though it were income, recommended a product designed for passive investors to someone who owns 24 rental units, and used the phrase barrier to entry to mean the opposite of what it means. That's really helpful, I said. I'll look into that. He seemed pleased. By the time we sat down to eat, Melissa had assumed her position. That's the only word for it, position, because it's less like sitting at a table and more like taking a mark. Across from me, flanked by Derek and the warm overhead light that caught her hair, in a way I suspected wasn't accidental, she ran the particular performance she's been running since we were children, which is the performance of a woman who has everything and knows it and feels genuinely terrible that you don't. She asked my mother about her hip. She admired the centerpiece in a way that was specific enough to sound sincere. She mentioned twice, in context that almost justified it, that their youngest was advanced for his age. She did all of this with the smoothness of someone who has so thoroughly internalized her role that she no longer experiences it as performance, which is, I'll acknowledge, the highest level of performance there is. My father watched her the way he always watches her, with something that is not quite relaxation, but is the closest he gets to it, a loosening across the shoulders, the particular quality of attention a person gives to something they consider an accomplishment. He built his life around visible proof of things. A framed watercolor on a wall. A daughter with 3 homes. Melissa refilled my mother's water glass without being asked. She's always been like that, my father said. To no one in particular watching her. Just good. The word landed the way he intended it to land. After the turkey, after my father's address, during the interval when the plates were being cleared and the pie hadn't yet arrived, Derek found a second wind on the subject of property values. The Westerville corridor is insane right now, he said, to the table in general. Sandra, your complex there, what's the HOA running? Because that area, we rent, my mother said. Right, he nodded. Still, the appreciation in that area alone, whoever owns that building is sitting on something. What's the management company? Because if you ever wanted to go owner-occupied, Crestview Holdings, I said. He looked at me. That's the management company, I said. For the building. Huh. He pulled out his phone, presumably to search it, then got distracted by something else and put it back. I watched him do this, and noted it, and said nothing. At the other end of the table, my Uncle Gerald, my father's older brother, a retired electrician who owns 2 dogs and a fishing boat, and has, in my observation, never said anything that wasn't either necessary or factually correct, was eating his turkey with the focused attention of a man with no interest in the conversation happening around him. He'd driven 4 hours for this meal. He was getting his money's worth. At some point during the clearing of the plates, Melissa caught my eye. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Long enough. In that look was something we've never said out loud, something that's been true our entire lives and probably always will be, that she knows the performance is a performance, and that I know she knows, and that neither of us has ever found the right moment or possibly the right language to do anything about it. She looked away first. She always does. I don't blame her for this, which surprises people who assume I should, but I understand it. Melissa found a system early, a way of being in this family that kept her safe, kept her praised, Cost her things she probably can't fully name yet. I found a different system. Neither of us chose the family we were handed. We just chose differently how to survive it. The difference is that I know exactly what I chose and why. I reached for my wine. My father was watching Derek explain something to my Uncle Gerald. Gerald was listening with the expression of a man allowing something to pass over him, like weather. The something was Derek's theory that the Federal Reserve's rate decisions were actually good for property investors if you understood them correctly, which Derek clearly felt he did. Gerald caught my eye, looked at Derek, looked back at me, said nothing. I raised my glass slightly. He returned to his turkey. This is the thing about my father's dinners. They have a structure, the same structure they've always had, an opening, a middle, a return. He makes his point and then he lets it breathe, and then, when the table has almost moved on, he picks it back up. He's been doing this since I was a child. I don't think he knows he does it. I think he simply doesn't feel finished until the point has been received in the way he intended it. He hadn't received anything from me. Not a flinch, not a defense, not the careful diplomatic non-response Melissa perfects, not my mother's held breath. I'd eaten my turkey. I'd listened to Derek explain equity. I'd raised my glass at Gerald. I'd given him nothing to work with. So I knew, with the certainty of someone who has studied a pattern for 38 years, that he wasn't finished. I went to the kitchen to get more coffee and left my phone on the table, face down. The cold hit me when I stepped outside. November in Ohio, not the dramatic cold of January, not something you describe to anyone, just a flat gray chill that sits against your face and reminds you winter isn't asking permission. My mother's porch light was on. Down the street, a neighbor's inflatable turkey was deflating slowly on their front lawn, listing to one side, looking how I imagine most people feel by the end of Thanksgiving. I'd told my mother I left something in my car. I hadn't left anything in my car. The car was parked at the end of the driveway, behind Derek's Tahoe, and I got in and closed the door and sat with the engine off and the quiet that comes when you remove yourself from a room full of people. Not silence, you can hear the neighborhood. A dog somewhere, a television through someone's window, but a different quality of air. Air that isn't performing anything. My phone had been in my coat pocket since I'd picked it up on the way out. I looked at it now. The notification was still there, unread, the way I'd left it when I glanced at it before dinner. I opened it. Crestview Holdings payment received. Elmwood Apartments, 1847 Maple Drive. Amount, $47,200. Date, November 1. 24 units. Their unit is 104. Ground floor, 2-bedroom, faces the parking lot. I've never been inside it. I've reviewed the maintenance records, new HVAC in 2021. A bathroom fixture replaced in the spring. A minor water intrusion around the sliding door that my property manager handled in September. I know the square footage. I know the rent they pay, which is $1,680 a month, which is below market for the area, because the previous owner hadn't updated leases in 6 years, and I decided, when I acquired the building, to hold existing rent steady for the first 12 months. 18 months ago, I made that decision. I looked up from my phone. The windshield had started to fog slightly at the edges, and in the rearview mirror I could see the rectangle of my own face, indistinct at the margins, clearer in the center. The porch light from my mother's house reached the end of the driveway and stopped. Out here, just the amber of the street lamp, and the gray of a sky that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to do. I looked at my face in the rearview mirror for a long time. This is the part I don't tell people, not because it's shameful, exactly, but because it's complicated in a way that doesn't compress well into the version of this story I've told myself for years. The version where I am the person who built something in silence, who asked nothing of anyone, who needed no audience. That version is true. And it is also not the complete truth, which is the most reliable kind of lie, the kind with a solid, factual foundation. Here is what I was thinking. In the parking lot, in the cold, I was thinking about the fact that I had known my parents' address for 18 months. I had known their rent, their unit number, their lease expiration date. I had reviewed their tenant file with the same detachment I apply to all 24 units. I had made a business decision to hold their rent steady, and thought no more of it, officially, than I'd thought about Gary and his herb garden, and then every month when the payment report came in, I'd read that line. Unit 104, Beaumont, $1,680. And I'd felt something. Not pleasure exactly. Something more structural than pleasure, the feeling of a proof completing, of a variable resolving. My father, who had spent 38 years cataloging my failures for an audience of anyone who would sit still long enough, had been writing me a check every month for a year and a half. Not to me by name, to Crestview Holdings, but to me. I had told myself I hadn't told them because I was protecting my business, because family and finance don't mix, and I'd seen enough inheritance disputes in property law to know that mixing them is how you lose things you've built carefully. That's true. That's a real reason. But in the parking lot, in the rearview mirror, with the fogged windshield and the deflating turkey down the street, I stopped pretending it was the only reason. I had wanted this. Not abstractly, not hypothetically. I had wanted a specific thing, which was for my father to find out, not for me to tell him, because telling him would give him the opportunity to respond, to frame it, to take the information and reassemble it into a shape that suited him. But for him to simply know, to hold the knowledge without any help from me, in public, in front of people, with nowhere to put it. I had kept this secret like a held breath, and the question sitting with me in the parking lot was one I didn't have a clean answer to, which is unusual for me and therefore uncomfortable. The question was this: was I walking back into that house to finally exhale to let something go? To stop being the person who keeps the proof in a file and never shows it? Or was I walking back in to finally get what I had been waiting for since I was 14 years old, standing in a doorway with a ribbon and a model made of PVC pipe and aquarium tubing? Those are different things. One of them is healing, the other one is still wanting something from him. I sat with that for a while, long enough that the windshield fogged another inch at the top. Down the street, the inflatable turkey completed its collapse. Here is what I decided. I decided that I was probably both, and that the presence of the second thing didn't cancel the legitimacy of the first. I decided that 38 years of building something in silence is worth something regardless of the audience, and that wanting, just once, to be seen by the person who was supposed to see you first, that's not weakness. That's just being human, even for people like me who prefer not to be. I decided that I wasn't going to do anything. Not manufacture something, not arrange something. I was going to walk back inside and sit at my mother's table and eat whatever pie she'd made. The email on my phone said bourbon pecan. She'd texted me about it Thursday morning, and I was going to let the evening be what it was going to be. My phone was going back on the table, face down, because the screen lights up with notifications, and I find it distracting during meals. I do this everywhere. I would do it here. If something happened, something happened. If nothing happened, I would drive home and the building would still be mine, and the monthly payment would still arrive on the first, and my father would never know. And that was also fine. That was the decision. I believed about 60% of it. I got out of the car and walked back up the driveway toward the porch light, and the cold went with me. And somewhere behind me, the deflated turkey shuddered once in the wind and was still. My mother had made 2 pies, bourbon pecan and pumpkin, because she always makes 2. Because in this family there are people who are wrong about pumpkin pie, and she has learned to accommodate them. I could smell both from the hallway. I hung up my coat. I went back to the table. My mother's pies were excellent. This is not a small thing, in my assessment. Baking requires a specific relationship with precision, that not everyone has the willingness to follow the variables exactly, to resist improvisation, to understand that what you want and what the recipe requires are not always the same thing. My mother never went to college. She spent 40 years inside this family, the way water spends time in a glass shaped entirely by the container, essential, unnoticed until gone. But she can make a pie crust from memory, in the dark, and it will be right every time. She set the pumpkin in front of me without asking. She knows which one I take. That's a kind of seeing too. I've thought about this. The table had reorganized itself the way tables do after the main course elbows on the linen, wine refilled, the loosened quality of people who have eaten enough that their defenses have softened. My Uncle Gerald had moved to the seat beside me, trading proximity to Derek for proximity to the bourbon pecan, which I respected as a decision. Across the table, Melissa was showing my mother something on her phone, the kindergarten, I gathered. Photos of the classroom. My mother leaned in with the full attention she extends to grandchildren and centerpieces and very little else. My father ate his pie in 4 careful bites and put his fork down. I watched him do this without appearing to watch, which is a skill I developed early and have never stopped finding useful. He has a particular way of folding his hands on the table when he's finished eating and ready to resume, and he did it now. Fingers laced, forearms on the linen. I talked to Bill Harrington last month, he said. Bill Harrington is a man my father has mentioned periodically for 20 years. He owns a hardware chain in central Ohio. He went to high school with my father. Every few years, his name surfaces in conversations as an emblem of something, of getting there, of knowing what matters, of the particular success my father finds legible. He started with 1 store, my father said. Now he's got 11. 63 years old. His son works with him. His daughter-in-law does the books. He looked at me. Family, he said. Built something real. I ate my pie. Claire. His voice shifted slightly, the register he uses when he's decided patience requires acknowledging the other person's existence directly. I'm not saying these things to be cruel. You understand that. I know, Dad. I'm saying them because someone has to. At the end of the table, Gerald refilled his coffee. He did it with the focused neutrality of a man who has heard variations of this conversation for 6 decades and has made his peace with the fact that his participation is neither requested nor useful. Derek, my father turned. You mentioned something earlier. About the company. Derek straightened. This is what Derek does when my father addresses him directly, a small physical elevation, like a dog that's heard its name. Yeah, absolutely. We've got some movement on the administrative side, coordinator role, something like that. He looked at me. Honestly, Claire, it could be a good fit. Get you into a structure, benefits, stability, that kind of foundation is important in your... He searched briefly for the word, your stage. My stage. I've spent 10 years structuring financing for commercial real estate acquisitions. I've negotiated with regional banks, with private lenders, with a particularly difficult credit union in Zanesville that required 4 meetings and a revised pro forma before they'd extend a line of credit for the Clintonville 4 unit. I hold a real estate broker's license and a property management certification, and I've read more environmental assessment reports than I'd recommend to anyone looking to preserve their faith in human optimism. What's the salary range? I asked. Derek named a figure. It was $4,200 less than what his parking space at Elmwood costs me each month. Not his unit, his parking space. The uncovered one beside the dumpster enclosure that goes for $85 a month because it's the least desirable spot in the lot. That's worth considering, I said. My father nodded, satisfied, in the way people are satisfied when they've arranged something. He had made a gesture toward my future, and the gesture had not been refused. And in his accounting, this constituted progress. He picked up his wine. The set of his shoulders relaxed a fraction. This was the moment I'd been watching build all evening, not the earlier declaration, which was blunt and aimed and loud in the way my father is loud when he wants to be heard. But this quieter thing, the offer extended, the help bestowed, the problem of me handed off to someone with an oak tree on his company logo. He'd done what he came to do. He'd been generous. He'd been a father. He was finished. I let him be finished for a moment. Then I reached into my coat pocket, which was hanging on the back of my chair, and took out my phone. The screen had lit up twice during dinner. I'd felt it. The way you feel vibrations when you're specifically not thinking about something. I turned it over. 2 notifications, both automated, nothing urgent. I put it on the table. Between the water glass and the pie plate, the screen facing down, sitting in the space where the linen had been smoothed flat by my mother's hand. I do this at every meal, at every table, in every restaurant and conference room and closing meeting I've been in for the past 5 years. The screen down habit, it's not theater, it's just how I work. But this was my mother's table, and my father's hands were right there. Excuse me, I said. I'm going to get more coffee. I pushed back my chair and stood and walked to the kitchen, and the voices behind me continued, Melissa asking Derek something, my mother offering seconds to Gerald, the ordinary texture of the table reassembling around my absence. And I took the carafe from the burner, and I filled my cup, and I stood at the counter for a moment in the kitchen light, which is fluorescent and slightly too bright, and has been slightly too bright my entire life. From the dining room, I could hear my father say something to my mother. Her reply, too low to parse. Then, a small sound, the specific sound, if you've ever heard it, of a phone being picked up off a hard surface. A flat click of glass and metal against linen and wood. I didn't turn around. I added cream to my coffee. The right amount, I know the right amount without measuring, the same way my mother knows her pie crust. Small thing. Mine. From the dining room? Nothing. A silence that was different from the silences that had come before it, with a texture that I can only describe, even now, as the texture of something ending. I picked up my coffee cup. I walked back to the table. I knew before I reached the doorway. Not because of any sound, there was no sound, which was itself the information. A table with 7 people generating no sound is not a table at rest. It's a table that has stopped. These are different conditions, and the difference is immediately legible to anyone paying attention, which I always am. I stepped into the doorway with my coffee cup and read the room in the way I read rooms. Left to right, faces first, then hands, then posture. My Uncle Gerald had put down his fork. He was looking at my father with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, and I've been cataloging Gerald's expressions since I was 6 years old. It wasn't surprise exactly, more like the look of a man who has picked up a board game box assuming checkers and discovered, upon opening it, something considerably more complicated. Derek had both hands flat on the table. His weight was slightly forward. His mouth was open, not in speech, just open, the hinge unlatched. Melissa was very still. Melissa is never very still. She moves through rooms the way water moves, filling spaces, finding the path of least resistance automatically. Still, Melissa was new information. My mother had one hand pressed against the base of her throat. And my father was holding my phone. He was holding it the way people hold things when they've forgotten that their hands are visible close to his chest, tilted slightly toward himself, screen facing him. He'd been reading, whether he was still reading or had already finished, and was simply continuing to look at the thing because he didn't know what else to do with it. I couldn't tell. His face had done something I'd never seen it do in 66 years of being my father's face. It had gone quiet. Not the controlled quiet he deploys when he wants to appear, measured the quiet he performs in arguments when he's decided that silence is the more powerful position. This was involuntary. This was the quiet of a system encountering an input it wasn't designed to process. The color was gone from it. Drained down and out, the way water clears from a bathtub, leaving only the white of the porcelain. I walked to my chair. I set my coffee cup on the table. I pulled the chair back and sat down. And I placed my napkin in my lap the way I always do, fold in half. Left side, the way my mother taught me, and I picked up my dessert fork. Then I looked at my father. "Dad," I said, "did you need something?" The words came out the way I'd intended them. The way I intend all words without inflection, that would tell him which direction to go with them. A question, simply. A person returning from the kitchen and observing that a thing has occurred and inquiring politely about its nature. He looked at me. For the first time in a very long time, possibly in my memory, he looked at me and had nothing. No prepared sentence. No framed response. No version of events assembled and ready for delivery. He looked at me the way people look at things they've misidentified, recalibrating, finding that the recalibration opened onto a longer calculation than he'd anticipated. He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at the phone. Then he turned to my mother. He held the phone out to her without speaking, and she took it the way you take something from someone who is handing it to you before you understand what it is. She looked at the screen. Her hand came back to her throat. Across the table, Melissa leaned forward. Not dramatically, just the small forward tilt of someone whose information is arriving delayed. One person behind. She looked at the screen over my mother's arm. I watched her face assemble the data in the order it arrived: the company name, the dollar figure, the address, and then I watched the moment it resolved. Her eyes came up to mine. The diplomatic expression, the careful non-wince she'd been perfecting since adolescence was simply absent. There was nothing behind it. The understudy had not learned the lines. Derek read it last, craning slightly, and then sat back in his chair with the specific posture of a man who has just been handed a social situation for which nothing in his experience has prepared him. Gerald had not moved. He looked at my father, at the phone, at me. He reached for the bourbon pecan and cut himself another slice. Nobody spoke. I want to be precise about how long this lasted. Because precision is the only tool I have for this particular thing, it lasted long enough for me to take one sip of my coffee, return the cup to the saucer, observe that the bourbon pecan was nearly gone, and note that the fluorescent warmth of the overhead light made the remaining piece look better than it probably was. 40 seconds. Perhaps 45. My father said, "Claire." His voice came out wrong. Not wrong the way a voice sounds when it's lying. Wrong the way a voice sounds when the architecture it usually runs on has been compromised. Load-bearing something, removed. This he stopped, started again. "This is the management company for—" "Yes," I said. Just the one word. He looked at the phone again. At the address he has written on forms for 6 years, that he has given to pharmacies and doctors' offices in the DMV. The address that arrives on his bank statement every month as a debit. The amount so familiar it has become invisible, the way familiar amounts do. "You own it," he said. Not a question, by the end of it. He'd intended it as a question, and it had arrived as something else. A finding. A verdict read aloud in an empty courtroom. "Yes," I said. My mother made the sound, the one I've heard my entire life, the held breath. The release through the nose. But longer this time. Unsteady at the edges. Melissa said nothing. I felt her looking at me, but I didn't return it. I was watching my father because this is the thing about moments you've imagined, they don't resemble the imagining. The imagined version had edges. This one didn't. This was just a man at a table, 66 years old, holding a phone that had rearranged something he thought he understood. And the rearrangement was happening in real time, in front of me, in front of his brother and his wife and his golden child and the man with the oak tree logo. And there was no version of it I could have prepared for, even having spent 18 months knowing it was possible. I picked up my fork. I finished my pie. The bourbon pecan was gone. Gerald had taken the last piece while the rest of the table was otherwise occupied, which struck me, in the part of my brain that never fully stops running calculations, as the correct decision, made at the correct time, by the only other person at the table who understood the value of an opening. My father set the phone down. He set it precisely where he'd found it, between the water glass and the pie plate, screen facing down, exactly as I'd left it. Then he folded his hands on the table, fingers laced, forearms on the linen. For the first time in 38 years, he had nothing to say. I let him have that. The silence was his. I wasn't going to fill it. Some things you build for years. You lay the foundation, and you frame the walls, and you run the electrical, and you wait. And then one day you hand over the keys and walk away, and the building stands or it doesn't, but either way, your part is finished. I had handed over the keys. I was finished. Here is what I expected would happen next. I expected my father to speak. To find, somewhere in the 66 years of infrastructure he'd built for exactly this kind of situation, the infrastructure of having opinions and delivering them some sentence that would allow him to reframe what he'd just seen. He's good at this. He's spent a lifetime at it. The reframe is the move. Take the incoming information, hold it briefly, return it to the table in a shape that restores the original hierarchy. I've watched him do it with job losses and divorces, and one bankruptcy in the extended family that he somehow transformed, within a single conversation, into a story about resilience. I expected the reframe. What I got was 8 minutes of my father not speaking. I know it was 8 minutes because I was watching the clock on the microwave, visible through the kitchen doorway from where I sat. It is the same microwave my parents have owned since 1994. The colon between the hours and minutes blinks every second. I counted a lot of seconds. During those 8 minutes, the table existed in a state I don't have precise language for. Not silence, there were sounds. My mother's fork touching her plate, someone's chair shifting, the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen. But these were the sounds of a room operating on reduced power, the way a building runs on emergency lighting, functional, dim, stripped of everything non-essential. Melissa looked at her phone under the table. She did it the way teenagers do, which is to say she believed she was doing it invisibly, which she was not. The screen lit her lap twice in quick succession. I didn't see who she was texting. I have a reasonable hypothesis. Derek had both forearms on the table and was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man running diagnostics on a situation that has exceeded his processing capacity. At one point, he appeared to be about to say something, drew breath, decided against it, and returned to the middle distance. I appreciated this more than I could have told him. Gerald ate his pie. My father tried twice before he got anything out. The first attempt happened around minute 3. He shifted in his chair, the particular shift of someone preparing to speak, weight redistributing, chin lifting slightly, and he looked at me and he said, "Claire," and then he stopped. Not for effect, not for strategy. He stopped because whatever came after, Claire had not arrived. He sat there with my name in the air between us, unfinished, and I watched him look for the rest of the sentence and not find it. And I said nothing, because the sentence was his to finish, and I had no intention of finishing it for him. The second attempt came at minute 6. He looked at my mother. Some communication passed between them that I wasn't party to, a look that married people develop over long decades. A compressed language, shorthand for things too complicated to say in front of company. My mother gave a very small shake of her head. I didn't know which question she was answering. "This is," he said. He stopped again. He picked up his wine glass, put it down without drinking. In 38 years, I had never seen my father pick up a glass and put it down without drinking. He's not a heavy drinker. He's simply a person who commits to his actions. Picking something up means using it. Setting it back down unused was new information. I finished my pie. The pumpkin was excellent. My mother does something with the spice ratios that I've asked about twice, and she's deflected twice, which I respect. Everyone is entitled to the things they keep to themselves. At minute 8, Gerald set his fork down. He did it slowly, deliberately, with the unhurried quality of a man who has decided that something needs to be said and has identified himself as the correct person to say it. He looked at my father. He looked at my father for a long moment, with the patience of an older brother who has been watching a younger one make noise for 6 decades. Then he said, "Your daughter is your landlord, Robert." Just that. He said it the way you read a number off a gauge, not with judgment, not with satisfaction, simply with the accuracy of someone reporting a factual condition that the relevant parties may have overlooked. Then he picked up his coffee cup and drank from it and set it back down, and that was the end of Gerald's contribution to the evening. I looked at my plate. I did not look up, because if I looked up, I would have seen Gerald's face, and if I saw Gerald's face, I was not confident. I could maintain the particular composure I'd been maintaining for 6 hours, and composure at this point felt important to me in the way a keystone feels important to an arch. Remove it and the whole structure discusses the matter loudly on the way down. From across the table, I heard Melissa make a sound. A soft, involuntary sound, quickly suppressed, the kind that escapes before the person making it has cleared it with the relevant internal department. It might have been a laugh. It might have been something else. I didn't look up to determine which. My mother spoke first, after Gerald. "We didn't know," she said. She was looking at me. Not at my father, not at the table, at me. Directly, in the way she very rarely looks at anyone directly. My mother moves her attention around rooms the way a lighthouse moves its beam, steady, rotating, never settling. But she was settled now. "I know," I said. "How long?" 18 months. She received this without visible reaction, which is its own kind of reaction, if you know her. She reached for the serving dish and straightened it on the table, aligning it with the edge of the placemat, which didn't need aligning. Her hands needed something to do, and she gave them something. My father was looking at the phone, which was still on the table between us, face down. He was looking at it the way people look at objects that have recently surprised them, as though the surprise might still be visible on the surface, as though looking carefully enough might explain how it got there. "Crestview," he said. Not to anyone, just the word, out loud, the name turning over in his mouth like something he was trying to place. "Yes," I said. "I've written that name on checks." "I know." He looked at me. His eyes had the quality of a man doing long division, not lost, not vacant, but deeply, privately occupied, working through something that wasn't resolving quickly. 18 months, he said. "Yes, and you didn't." He stopped. Chose the next words with a care I hadn't seen from him before. "You didn't say anything." I looked at him. I thought about the watercolor on the wall, the ribbon in the recycling bin. The 38 years of things I'd put in rooms he didn't have access to. No, I said. I didn't. He looked back at the phone. Derek cleared his throat. We all waited to see if this was preparatory to speech or simply reflexive. It was reflexive. He picked up his water glass and turned it slowly in his hands, and appeared to be reading the room for the first time that evening with something approaching accuracy. Under the table, Melissa's phone screen lit up again. My mother stood and began collecting the dessert plates, moving around the table with the quiet efficiency of someone who has spent 40 years converting uncomfortable silences into tasks. She took my father's plate. She took Gerald's. She passed behind my chair and her hand rested briefly on my shoulder, barely a second. No pressure, just the fact of it. And then she moved on to Melissa's side of the table. I sat with the weight of that hand for a long time after it was gone. The table had gone back to the low sounds. The refrigerator. A chair. Outside, the wind had picked up and the neighbor's collapsed turkey was audible against their porch railing, a soft, irregular tapping. My father unfolded his hands. He placed them flat on the linen, palms down, fingers spread, the way people place their hands when they are trying to feel the surface beneath them. To confirm that the table is still there, that the floor is still there, that the room, despite everything, is still a room. It was. It remained. Some things hold. He did not say anything else. Neither did I. 3 weeks later, my father called. I was at my desk when the phone rang a Tuesday morning. Overcast, the kind of November day that can't decide if it wants to commit to winter. I was reviewing a capital expenditure report for the Clintonville properties when his name appeared on the screen. I looked at it through 2 full rings. Then I answered. "Claire," he said. "Dad." A pause. Not his usual pause. Not the pause of a man organizing his next point, but the pause of someone standing at the edge of something they've measured and still aren't sure about. "I didn't know," he said. 3 words. That was all. No elaboration, no context, no architectural support. Just the 3 words, delivered with the careful flatness of a person who has practiced them enough to get them out, but not enough to make them sound easy. "I know you didn't," I said. Another pause. "Okay," he said. "Okay," I said. We stayed on the line for another 4 seconds, I counted, and then he said goodbye. And I said goodbye and we hung up. And I sat at my desk and looked at the capital expenditure report for a while without reading it. That was the conversation. That was the whole of it. Derek called his brother the night of Thanksgiving. I know this because of what happened next, which is that Derek's brother told his wife, and his wife forwarded the information to a group chat that I have been informed exists, and that includes, at last count, 27 members of the extended family on both sides. On the Saturday after Thanksgiving, 2 days after the dinner, while I was at the laundromat because my building's washer was being serviced, Derek posted to that group chat. He did it, as far as I can tell, with the sincere intention of being generous. Wanted to share something amazing about Claire. Turns out she's been running a real estate company for years. Crestview Holdings. The family's actually been living in one of her buildings. Really impressive stuff. He included a link to the Crestview Holdings LLC filing, which is a public record, which lists my name, which links to my broker's license, which lists 7 properties and their assessed values. I found out about this when my cousin Angela texted me directly. Girl, the family group chat is on fire right now. By Sunday evening, Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, 71 years old, no known filter, had replied to the group chat with, "Wait, so Robert called her the family disgrace and she owns the building he lives in?" Derek had replied, "Haha, yeah, that was quite a moment," followed by a slightly bewildered emoji. He had, without any assistance from me, told 30 people the complete story, including the punchline, in a format that could be screenshotted and preserved indefinitely. I genuinely do not know what to do with Derek Walsh. As a human being, he remains a category I haven't fully resolved. At Christmas, my cousin Mike handed my father a beer and said, "How's the apartment? Good landlord?" I was in the kitchen when it happened. I heard it through the doorway. I heard the brief silence that followed. Then I heard my father say, quietly, "She keeps the building well." That was it. 4 words that cost him something, delivered to a man who had expected either an explosion or a denial, and received instead a plain, factual statement. I stood at the kitchen counter with my glass of wine and I thought, there it is. That's the thing I didn't know I was waiting for, which is not an apology and not a transformation, but the simple acknowledgement from a man built entirely of opinions that someone else had gotten something right. It wasn't enough. It also wasn't nothing. I'm still working out where that lands. My mother sent me a letter. Not an email, a letter, handwritten on the pale blue stationery she has kept in her desk drawer since before I was born. 2 paragraphs. Her handwriting is neat and slightly formal, the penmanship of a generation that was graded on it. The first paragraph said that she was proud of me. She said it plainly, without decoration. The second paragraph said that she had kept the certificate from the science fair. She'd found it in the recycling bin the night I'd gone to bed, and she'd put it in a shoebox in her closet, and the shoebox was still there, and she was sorry it had taken her this long to tell me. I read the letter at my kitchen table on a Wednesday morning in December, with my coffee going cold beside me. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it along its original creases and put it in the drawer of my desk where I keep things I want to be able to find. In January, the Elmwood leases came up for renewal. 24 units. I reviewed them the way I review all renewals systematically, with the current market data, adjusting for maintenance costs and vacancy risk, and the particular calculus of what a stable, paying tenant is worth against the friction of replacement. 22 units I renewed at a modest market rate increase. 2 units presented specific circumstances. Unit 104 I renewed at the same rate, $1,680 a month, same as before, for another 2 years. I didn't call my father to tell him. I processed it through my property manager the same way I process everything. And the confirmation went to their address. And that was that. This was not forgiveness. I want to be precise about that, because I think precision matters here more than it usually does. It was a business decision. A stable, long-term tenant in a ground floor unit is worth more than the delta between their current rate and market. That's the calculation. It was also something else. I don't have the exact word for it. Something in the territory of choosing not to use a thing you have the right to use. Not because you've forgotten you have it, because you've decided, after considerable thought, that having it is enough. My apartment is on the 4th floor of a building I also own, which is a fact I find quietly amusing in the way I find most things quietly amusing privately, without making a production of it. It's a 1-bedroom. Clean lines, good light in the mornings. A kitchen I've replaced in increments over 4 years, until it became the kitchen I actually wanted. I have a coffee maker that takes 4 minutes, and a reading chair that I bought for too much money and have never once regretted. On the wall beside the window, I've hung one thing. A framed certificate, slightly yellowed at the edges, signed by a judge named Dr. Patricia Holt. 2nd place. Regional Science Fair. 2001. My mother was right that it was worth keeping. She was right about most things. She just spent 40 years in a house where that didn't matter. And I have spent 38 years becoming someone for whom it does, and maybe that's the thing I was actually building all along. Not the portfolio, not the proof, not the moment at the table when the color left my father's face. Just a room that belongs entirely to me, where the things I carry come home. Maybe you know this feeling. You spent years building something real quietly, carefully, without asking anyone to watch, and the person who was supposed to be proud of you first was the last to know. Maybe you're still waiting for that phone call. Maybe it came and it wasn't enough. Maybe it was almost enough, which is its own kind of hard. Here's what Claire's story taught me. You don't build a life to prove something to someone who is never going to see it anyway. You build it because it's yours. The approval you've been waiting for, you already gave it to yourself the moment you refused to stop. You just didn't notice, because you were busy working. The most valuable property you will ever own isn't on any deed. It's the version of yourself that kept going when no one was watching. Did anyone in your life make you feel like the family disgrace? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.
Thank you for being part of Lyra Echo Stories. If this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because every echo never truly fades.